Hey guys, I'm going to go over workbook page 152 with you. That's the assignment for Monday. The first thing that I want to make sure you know is that the chart at the top of the page is going to be very important to you. So I want you to take a second and look at the chart with me from the top of page 152. The first row in the chart tells you all different percentages. And look through those percentages. You have 10%, 20%, 25%. Those are some percentages that we've talked about a little bit. But then you have 33 and 1/3%. That percentage seems like a strange percentage to have a percentage with a fraction. But the reason that it's included is because it's equivalent to the fraction 1/3. And it is common for people to use a third percentage to charge something in a store or for prices for things. They do it by thirds. Or there are many circumstances where you might see a third percentage used. And it just so happens that the number in a percentage is 33 and 1/3%. And we'll talk about that in a decimal in just a second. Then you have 40%, 50%, 60%, and then another one that seems a little odd, the 66 and 2/3%. Again, that's because they use the fraction 2/3. There are times that we want to talk about 2/3 of something, and you need that as a percentage. It's just a common fraction, and it's used as a percentage too. Then you have 75% and 80%. Okay, so some of those seem very normal. I just wanted to point out that you have that 33 and 1/3 and that 66 and 2/3%, so you recognize that it's there. Now look at the fraction bar, and as you look at the fraction bar, you want to relate it to the percentages at the top. So if you'll see, 1/10 is the fraction for 10%, and we talked about that on Friday. Okay, I'm going to write that down on the board here. 10% equals 1/10. And I've written them kind of far apart because there's something to get you from point A to point B here to know that these are equivalent. Remember we said 10% means 10 out of 100. So write that fraction first. So 10% means 10 out of 100. So every single percentage has a fraction equivalent, and then you can simplify a lot of those fractions, okay? Now, while we're here, I want you to go ahead and look at the decimal row below that. 0.1. Please make sure you read that decimal to yourself the way that we read decimals. That's not 0.1 or decimal 1. That is 1/10. It's in the tenths place. That's the same thing as this fraction 1/10. Okay, so 1/10 as a fraction and 1/10 as a decimal, same thing. And this is the simplified version to get from 10%. Okay, that's how they're relating those numbers. Percent, fraction, decimal. Okay, now let's look at 20%. I'm not going to go through all of these with you, but you just need to realize how they're coming up. They're not just numbers that you need to memorize. They're numbers that you need to remember the process for how you make equivalents, okay? So 20%, it says in the chart here, is the same as the fraction 1/5. So how do we get from 20% to 1/5? Well, to get from point A to point B, 20% means 20 out of 100, okay? And then this 1/5 is simplified from the 20 out of 100, okay? So if you divide by 20 and divide by 20, that's how you come up with that simplified fraction 1/5. Now, if you look at the decimal for 1/5, it says 2/10. So how do they get from 1/5 to 2/10? Well, you just have to back up a step here. If you look at 20 over 100, you may recognize that that's the same fraction as 2/10. They just canceled off these zeros here, okay? So 20% is the same as 20 out of 100. It's the same as 2/10, and simplified is 1/5. Now you can see how this 2/10 as a fraction is the same thing as 2/10 as a decimal. So 1/5 is equivalent to the decimal 2/10. So we could do that for all the numbers in the chart. You just need to have this in mind, especially for the fractions for right now, okay? We're going to use the fractions to help us find percent of a number, because that's what you ended with fractions, was being able to use a fraction of a number. Like you learned how to find 1/3 of 40, or you learned how to find 1/5 of 50, okay? So we're going to use these fractions to help us from the percentage to figure out the percentage of a number, okay? So That's what your instructions say at the bottom of the page. Find each using mental math. Well, you can use mental math the more you practice it, but we are going to go through the process right now. So number 1 tells you to find 25% of 200. Okay? So this is going to be, a percentage is a part of a whole. It's not 100%, it's 25%. And this 25%, since it's a part of a whole, is the same as a fraction. Now, you should be realizing if this is 25 out of 100 here, you automatically know what fraction 25% is. Okay, think about quarters and how many quarters there are in a dollar. And you should be thinking automatically of the fraction. If you need to look in the chart to find out, you can use the chart too. It's written right there for you. But you should realize that 25%, that's 25 out of 100. That's like 1/4 of a dollar. So this fraction equivalency is 1/4. So now we can write the problem as 1/4 of 200. Now, you just learned before Miss Akery left that this of always means multiplication. Okay, so I'm going to erase it out of there and I'm going to put a multiplication sign. If it says of something, you're going to be multiplying to find the number. Okay, so we're going to find 1/4 of 200. Okay, by multiplying. Now, if you set this up as a fraction here, this 200 is a whole number, but it has a denominator, and all whole numbers have a denominator of 1. So this is what your problem should look like. 1/4 times 200 over 1, okay? It's a multiplication problem, but it's going to help us simplify this down to get to a whole number that tells us 1/4 of 200, okay? So if you remember back, there's a couple ways to do this, and I think what you did first was recognize that you can simplify some terms, okay? 4 and 200 have something in common. You can divide both of them by 4, okay? So if you want to do that first, you can. I would change this 4 to a 1 because you're dividing it by 4. You can do the same thing to 200. 200 divided by 4. Oops, I'm not going to write the 4 there. 200 divided by 4 would give you 50. Okay? So now you can just multiply straight across. You can multiply straight across the 1 times 200 and the 4 times 1 and simplify it. I'm going to do that also. Okay? I'm going to write that down below. You can do it either way. Okay, so if you don't want to do this crossing out system up here, you can just go straight across and multiply. So 1 times 200 is 200, and 4 times 1 is 4. So then what you have to do is 200 divided by 4, which gives you the 50 up here. Okay, so 200 divided by 4 is 50. So really what you've done is divided that whole number by your denominator here, if you have a 1 on the top. Okay. So your number 1 answer, 25% of 200 is 1/4 of 200 is 50. So you can write your answer for number 1 is 50. Okay? All right. So every time you're looking at a percentage, you're thinking, what fraction is that? And then you're setting it up as a multiplication problem with a fraction. Let's look at number 3. I'm skipping number 2 on purpose because I think that one's going to be a little bit more obvious to you. So let's look at number 3. So number 3 asks us to find 30% of 60, okay? As soon as you see that 30%, you need to be thinking of a fraction, okay? So how do you write 30% as a fraction? Well, you can write any percentage as a fraction by setting the number over 100, 30 out of 100. So we'll set that up here. But then you may recognize there's an easier way to write that fraction. There's a simplified version of that. Okay, so if you divide 30 and 100 by 10, that's the same thing as 3/10. 30 over 100 simplifies to 3/10. So we want 3/10 of 60. Okay, so 3/10 of 60, and I'm going to replace the of with a multiplication symbol. So you have 3/10 times 60. Okay, and we're going to set this whole number 60 up over 1 because we're making these into fractions to use, okay? So you can just multiply straight across. This is what I'm going to do this time. 3 times 60 will give you 180 because 3 times 6 is 18. and then 180 over 10. Okay, this is an improper fraction. So what do you do if you have an improper fraction? This is a division symbol. So 180 divided by 10 gives you, I'll write that down, divided by 10 equals 18. So what is 30% of 60? It is 18. So the process is find out what fraction matches your percent, and if you need to know it, it's in the table, and then make that into the fraction and multiply it by your whole number, okay, and then simplify it out. Okay, I'm also going to do number 4 with you, and then I think you'll be set for the back. Number 4 says 10% of 370. 10% of 370. So you need to think what fraction is equivalent to 10%, okay? So you can write it 10 over 100. All percentages are a number over 100, just like this. And then what can you simplify it down to? So 10 out of 100 becomes 1/10. And then you're going to do 1/10 of 370. And this, I do want you to start thinking about it a little bit more automatically. You can do 10% of any number, okay? If you want to know 10% of something, you can just take the 0 off the end of it, okay? So what would 10% of 370 be? If you just take that 0 away, it's like dividing it by 10. It would be 37. But we'll set it up just to show you. I'm going to replace that of with the multiplication sign. Okay, and then I'm going to put 370 over 1. So 1/10 of 370 we write this way. Now just multiply. 1 times 370 is 370. And 10 times 1 is 10. And now you just divide by 10. So you can just take the 2 zeros off the end of that. So 370 divided by 10 gives you 37. And your answer is just 37. It's the whole number, 37. Okay? All right. I do want to say, guys, that when you're watching these videos, I think it would be helpful for you if you grab a piece of paper or your math notebook, whatever you have with you, and write down some of these problems as we're doing them together. If you need to pause the video or back it back up, you have the ability to do that, okay? I don't know if it's going to be as helpful if you're just watching and you're not practicing it with me when I talk about it, okay? Just like the regular class. That's up to you, whatever works best for you. If you watch it and you totally get it and you're ready to work, go for it, okay? But if you feel like you are not getting what you need to out of the video, grab a piece of paper and write this down and work through it and keep going back until you're like, oh, okay, that's what she was doing there, okay? If you have any questions or you need me to do something differently for you, text me or call me, okay, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So workbook page 152, I've done several problems from the front with you, and you guys finish up the front and do the back, okay? Have a great Monday. See you later.